Welcome back, my good sis Mari.
Hey, Mel. Welcome back to Got Melanin.
The podcast where we dissect every and all things Black and POC. Black and POC. No discrimination here.
Amen. From us to you, for the world, Black and proud. This is us at this exact moment.
This is very exciting. I want to jump in straight away into like what we did yesterday. Mm-hmm. It's pretty monumentous and very exciting. We yesterday actually had our official WCAPS UK/European chapter launch event.
Of course.
Yeah, obviously all online. Disclaimer: we didn't fly nobody out to come and see us. But yeah, we had a nice big Zoom webinar, and we were so incredibly lucky with our speakers, who again, I want to thank, I think Mari and I can thank on behalf of all of WCAPS, like, thank you so much for everything that was said yesterday. It was a whirlwind of just conversation and information and like, yeah, just incredible.
It's honestly something that I feel like is so hard for us to unpack, because when we think about things, we've literally been working on this for shockingly only a month, but a month that feels like is the biggest whirlwind past 4 weeks, especially in quarantine, when time feels to go by slow. And I think what was so important and so poignant from all four of our panelists, and you as our lovely moderator, and Ambassador Jenkins as our keynote, Anu is our mover and shaker and, chairperson of everything that we were doing.
The GOAT.
That as women, and women of color specifically, we spoke about things and spaces in which you rarely hear women speak. From Haley Ramsey Jones talking about the intersections between nuclear and race, or learning new things that I had never learned about Nepal and institutions of rape and displacement, or even you and I just talked about this even earlier, about new things in race and psychology and race and healthcare and its effects on, specifically here in the UK, the Somali community, and back in America, Black women in general, across the board.
Yeah. Shocking.
Yeah.
No, I think we got incredibly lucky with who we had speaking, and it is, you know what I mean? It's exactly that. Like, even ourselves as Black women, we move in these spaces, and it's not often, I think, because at least personally, like, I've definitely moved in like white spaces my whole life. And it's weird to turn around now and be like, well, oh wow, so this is actually where I was like moving in. This is the actual like space. Like, this is what it looks like, because I had a Western upbringing. So for me, like, it just kind of made sense. Like, that's just how the world works and the cookie crumbles and all of that, so, but now it's like awakening. and I think between Dr. Yadav and Dr. Salah and Haley and Linda, it was just a plethora of just like experiences. And I think Linda's talk in particular, obviously they were all amazing, but Linda's talk in particular shocked us to our core.
Yep.
Because Linda essentially yesterday clarified the, because it's not a myth, but she clarified the idea that in science and like in healthcare, people will say like, oh, well, there's just racial genetic things that happen. Like, Black men are more prone to heart disease. Black women are more prone to dying during child labor. And it's like childbirth, it's not child labor. Sorry. During labor to give birth to a child. But basically it's like, oh, well, is it actually genetic? Like, in racial, because again, race doesn't exist. Like, this is a very like Western, like 19th century social constructs that was put together to justify colonialism and imperialism, but that's apparently like too sensitive of a topic to go into. So instead, now it's like, so if it's not racially genetic, like, why does that still happen though? And she clarified it to put it in the way that like trauma will affect you from like a physiological point of view. Like,
yes,
it can literally rock you to your core to the point where you suffer from more diseases that like you probably wouldn't normally have to. And it's not trauma of like, oh, like, you know, I had a really hard upbringing, blah, blah, blah. It's the fact of like being a part of a community in a society that refuses to recognize and accept that you are on the same level as everyone else.
Mm-hmm. There's an old adage that talks about trauma being inherited and being generational. And I feel like that is exactly what was at the crux of the talk yesterday. She specifically said, right, Black women in particular are at the intersection of race, class, and gender. That is putting you in a place where you have a higher propensity to have trauma, to have problems, to be affected by things that naturally would not affect other people and other populations. And I think what made all of the talks actually so poignant in this moment is they talked about, we are finally getting the opportunity to discuss that the ideology that the white norm that we can only test, we can only use the standard being white, is negatively and systemically and systematically affecting Black people in a disproportionate manner. It is literally saying we have a scale in which the barometer does not fit you. And so we naturally are going to fall on the tail end of it. And that, I think, in this moment, for a lot of people, as I was watching the Twitter feed and following the social media, and even the questions that we were getting, was eye-opening to a certain extent. I think they were shocked to hear, statistically, how much this really was affecting people.
Yeah. Once you boil it down like that, and you just go like, literally though, like X amount of women experience this, X amount, like people just kind of, really? That's shocking. Why is it shocking? Because we don't want to recognize that these things happen. Like, I saw, it's a bit off topic, but I saw this clip on this video yesterday. Honestly, I've been watching so much stuff lately that like I can't pinpoint where is what anymore. But it's like an old clip, like from, you know, must have been like 1930 or 40 kind of thing in the US. And it's this scene of this Black man that's being stopped by like white men with shotguns and being searched. And in my head, I'm like, would they have been like the local authority, like where that would, and a shot, like, and searching for what? Like, what's the, because this man, I'm not, you know what I mean? Like, looks can be deceiving. I don't know who this person was. I'm not about to claim that they have some sort of like innocence, but you never see these scenes happening like for other groups in to that level, like consistently like that all the time, you know. So many things have happened in the last 2 weeks that, although, you know, last time we recorded this, we were like, the ball is rolling, like the bus is going, we are on this, like it's happening and everything like that. And then in the last 2 weeks, I've had my hopes crushed at least like 30 times.
Welcome back. It's a long, slow process. Everybody whose timeline is now normal. Black lives still matter. They mattered before it started. They matter now. And they're going to matter next week, in case you forget.
And
but
next year. And the year after that. And they finna still keep mattering until we reach a point where people don't feel the need to reply back to Black Lives Matter with all lives matter. It's pretty simple. It's like.
But that's the reality. And I think for you and I, the reason that you are continually being rocked is not that there is anything new occurring. It is that even though you knew things were already happening and you were seeing it within your own sphere, now your entire world, i.e. the media that you're consuming, has now been basically taken, and the only thing you are being fed is the effects of Black people being disenfranchised by a system. And I guess, where do we start, right? That's the question. 2 weeks have passed, and where do we start? And I think if we're going to talk about shocking and most startling, you have to get right to the cases in which you saw occur after people started protesting, i.e. people like Rayshard Brooks, and in Atlanta. And that, again, you saw a Black man caught on video who was doing right by the law. Let's be clear, he was sleeping in his car so he would not get a DUI. Mm-hmm. He was approached by the police. He was doing nothing wrong, correct? And you saw someone use deadly force on somebody who was not. And, you know, I think there are a lot of people right now that are like, oh, it's a small victory. The cop was charged with a felony. We've never seen that happen, 11 charges. But whose victory for who, right? You literally have Black people in the streets crying, screaming, our lives matter. And in the midst of this, you were still able to do exactly what you did. That is eye-opening. And I don't necessarily know if it's eye-opening for me because I'm not particularly shocked. But I think that it is very telling of how deeply entrenched these systems are.
Well, and it's very telling that you're also not particularly shocked.
That's true.
Like, obviously not on you. Like, it's just telling of the situation and of, like, what it is. Like, I remember when George Floyd's video, like, first, you know, really came out and was being shared everywhere. I think this must have been one of the first times that you and I bonded, because we both were like, can people please stop sharing this? Like, this is getting grotesque. You know, this is not some sort of, like, entertainment. And it's almost as if we've reached a point now where, and this is not necessarily only in the US either, like, it can be like, I'm French, so it can be also like, this is something that I've seen also in France, where you have cases of, like, Black and brown bodies being literally violated and nothing is done about it. And it's just kind of like, you know, a various kind of fact, like the word in French for, like, you know, daily news is faits divers. So it's like various facts of the day, like various things that occurred. Like, whenever those things happen in France, it's a various fact. It's a fait divers. It's not like a huge, like, outpour of stuff. And I think in France, when people joined in and held their own BLM protests in Paris, it, like, really shocked people, because they're like, what? You see? No, oh my goodness, we are not da-da-da-da. I'm like, there are cases. It's just that they're not spoken of because, like, people don't, we've reached a point where we've been conditioned to not pay, like, that much attention to it and not, like, attach that much value to it. Why is it that when we were, like, when you and I were, like, growing up and stuff, so, like, early 2000s kind of thing, the, like, humanitarian hotspot was Africa. All I thought my cousins were, because I'd not been to Congo, all I thought my cousins were like little kids with flies and, like, near mud huts, da-da-da-da. I went to Kinshasa, my mind was blown. Blown. I was like, there's skyscrapers, this isn't it. But not to that extent. And I think it is just like, it kind of goes into what Linda was also saying, right? We've reached a point where, like, the trauma is so deep that it affects our health. It affects our mental health, our physical health. It affects how we're viewed from, like, within society, and how we view society back as well. You know, why is it that Black people always hang around with each other? Because they don't necessarily feel like they're welcomed in other spaces. Like, it is not that difficult to understand. Like, I don't know, I could ramble on about this probably.
No, I hear what you're saying. And to your first point, which I think is applicable both in France and in the UK, to death, or in France, in the UK, and the US, particularly in the US, was there has always been a spectacle of displaying Black bodies when they are maimed, when they are killed, and done in front of a white audience and put on display. It doesn't matter if we are talking about the lynch mobs of Reconstruction, where people literally would sit on a blanket and watch people be lynched. They would create gallows in which people could be seen for miles and take tickets and take pictures. And this is the thing. This is a long time coming of seeing this. And I think with the invention of social media, it is now being brought to mass consumption. It is one thing for us to look in history books and see pictures of people like Emmett Till, may he rest in peace. It is one thing. His mother made a very conscious decision to have an open casket because she wanted people to see what had been done to her son, right? These are conscious, and that still didn't awaken people. People still were able to continue to consume this, like you said, as they are facts of the day. These Black bodies being killed in this system, whether they be violently or just through the generational trauma in which you were just speaking about, it's become normalized. The same way that we can sit here 103 days after Breonna Taylor has been killed. And Louisville, the best they can give me is, oh, we've created Breonna's Law. So we haven't arrested or charged the people that have killed her. Oh, they're fired. But we created Breonna's Law. Yeah, no,
only one of them.
Exactly. But we created Breonna's Law, so there are no more no-knock warrants, and body cams must be on. Well, now, somebody had to die for that to happen. But if you're trying to talk to me about body cams must be on, pretty much every video we've seen in the past few weeks is because a body cam was on, and did that help us in that situation?
Well, and people it's not as if there's a way to safeguard or hold accountable that everyone has their body cam on. Like there have been instances where there's no footage because, oh, it accidentally turned off. Oh yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, the way my dog ate my homework, sounds good.
Well, let's just be real. 99% of police-involved shootings, police-involved killings, do not get charges. 99%. That's what makes you feel like you can do these things without any ramification, because statistically, you can.
Oh my God. Can we, what's the name, that officer that was bailed out from George Floyd's murder?
J. Alexander Khan?
Oh my God.
I don't believe that I should say the names of people that have killed people because you don't deserve my publicity, but you did walk around getting your Oreos in a public store in Ohio and were called out, and I'm not saying I'm mad at it. Honestly, my favorite bit is just when he gets stopped and asked, because he's there saying it with his chest, yes, I am Jay, what, blah, blah, blah. Yep, that's me, yes. Oh, okay, well, in that case, I have some things to say to you. Shocking. The idea of the man was a rookie, literally had been on the force for 2 weeks, if that, and you're still walking around with all that privilege, even though you have been on the force for less than a month, legit. And you're still walking around as if and we're in a pandemic, my guy. You can wear a mask. If you're trying to hide your identity, at least wear a mask and hold people. So many things wrong with all of that. And I'm just so grateful to that woman for getting it on video and for just holding him to account right then and there in public at the store, talking about, I'm here getting essentials. Oreos are your essentials? Really? You can't even at least lie and be yes, I'm here getting snacks. Bruh, come on now. I honestly don't even have words for that. I wish I could give you some super enlightened statistic or some really long speech about what it means to understand your guilt and your place in society. I don't have it. I genuinely do not have it. That type of brazen disrespect and disregard, the lack of empathy, the lack of understanding.
Literally none.
For your actions.
Yeah, because let's be clear, he did not, okay, because the thing is, right, if he felt any sort of shame about what had happened, what ended up, their whatever kind of call that it was, the fact that it ended in not only the death of George Floyd, who was a respected man in his community and everything, and had done nothing wrong, but also the fact that it sparked now a revolution and a wake-up call for people. So The man was not ashamed because he helped in the murder of someone. The man was ashamed because he was being called out publicly in a store where he couldn't go away and run away because he had to get his damn Oreos. Like, let's be clear about that. It's the same way that, like, you know that video that probably came out like a year ago or so, but it was this guy who had filmed himself, who like was a receptionist at a hotel, like a Holiday Inn or whatever, and then like, and he's like a visibly black man, like, I don't know how else you can say that, but basically like this older white woman came up and was saying like, I need to get like this room specifically, da 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 da, and then he was like, I'm sorry man, like I can't do that for you, and she basically like sweared at him and called him the N-word. Like hard R, not even some soft stuff, like hard R.
Lovely.
And he puts out his phone and then he's like, nope, this woman's a racist. I'm not doing anything for you at this point. And he's literally like, you need to leave. She starts crying, calling for her like daughter to come and talk to him, da-da-da, and all this stuff. And then he's there telling the daughter, like, your mother called me an N-word with a hard R. I am not servicing her today. Matter of fact, none of you would be in this hotel if it were up to me. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, there's another hotel down the street. You can go and stay down there. Like, it's above me now. And that was the whole line he kept saying, like, it's above me now. It's above me now. And that was my favorite bit. But again, in that situation, she's not crying. She's not ashamed because of what she said. She's ashamed of the fact that now it's resulted in her being publicly humiliated because it went online. Whether or not they said her name, like, it went online. We all heard this woman's voice. Right. And also the fact that this like hotel receptionist, this N-word with the hard R that she thought that she could manipulate and like scare into submission was like, not today, Satan. and basically was like, you're not getting away with this today. And so she's mad at that. She's frustrated at that. And that's where that emotion comes from. Like, same thing, literally saw a video 2 days ago of a Postmates courier that got like cut off and flipped off in traffic and stuff, like a very aggressive driver. And so he goes and confronts her. And when he goes and confronts her, she's like, you're getting the crying.
Oh, you sent me that video.
Yeah. Because I was like, girl, look at this. Like, no, come on now. Like, this is insane. So that's what I'm saying. Like, all of these, and to see that now it's like this, I think he's mixed, the police officer. I don't want to speak on it, but also visibly black male. For him to also now have this sort of shame and have this like reaction that we associate with those who are just completely missing the point and who are selfish in their reaction, and in that like they feel bad that they're embarrassed now. Like, nah, let's be real. Like, you're not sad about what you said or what you did. You're sad that now you have to reap the consequences of it, like, publicly, and that you can't use your white card to get out of it. Like, bye.
Yeah, and yeah, honestly, you hit the nail on the head there, genuinely. And I think, interestingly enough, the person who started that groundswell of, A, people are now calling people out and people are paying attention to being called out.
Yeah.
And B, people are realizing that, oh no, you're gonna get publicly embarrassed if you act racist in public, is us even going back before our last show to Amy Cooper. I think what scares people the most about Amy Cooper is that she is supposed to be a good guy. She is a white, liberal woman from New York City. By all stretches of the imagination, everything that we are taught in terms of, prior to this movement, in terms of proper allyship, came from white women and being liberal. They were supposed to be the optimum ally because they understood femininity and the feminist struggle, which was different than white men who operate inside the patriarchy. Well, now that's no longer enough. That is no longer the bare minimum. Not being racist is not the basis for okayness. Yeah. You actively need to be anti-racist. And if you are engaging in things like microaggressions, or even, as you just said, overt things like calling people the N-word.
With a hard R.
Like with a hard R, we have a problem. And you know what? That makes me, like, we think about public naming and shaming. That makes me think about all the statues that are beginning to come down across the globe. And we talked a lot. We actually touched on that yesterday in the virtual launch. And luckily we had a consensus amongst our amazing panelists that they need to just come down, or as Haley Ramsey Jones said, put them in a museum of shame, which I'm not opposed to. And there has been, getting back to us living here in the UK, there has been a lot of fervor by the hooligans, as it were, to come up and stand up for their statues. So I live, as you know, here in London. I live in Elephant and Castle, just south of the Thames, not far from Westminster. And a few weeks ago, the BLM protesters here, following what happened up in Bristol, them taking down that statue. Mind you, that statue was really flimsy. I don't know if you saw that video. It sounded real hollow on the inside. I don't want to talk about it, but we're happy that it is now in an ocean. And so they had planned to take down the statue here in London of Churchill, which actually is in Parliament Plaza, I believe, like in Westminster.
Yeah. And
the hooligans, or the far right here in the UK, decided this was their moment. This was when they were going to come and stand up for Britain. I mean, I would vote that these were most likely Brexiteers, but that's another conversation. They referred to themselves as football lads. Again, another conversation for another day. Racism in sport. But they came out and had an actual anti-protest against Black Lives Matter to save this statue. Mind you, most people from Black Lives Matter here in London decided not to go. So then this became a clash between these British nationalists and the police. And the scenes that you saw coming out of this, we've seen all across the media, especially the media here in the UK, talk about the violence of the peaceful protests. There are no quotes around this. These have been peaceful protests, both in the United States and here in the UK. You and I both can attest to that because we have been there and seen them.
Yep.
And they have talked about the violence of protesters, but you are looking at the videos of this anti-Black protest. They are boxing the police, literally boxing them, throwing cans of alcohol, mobbing them. And this was not in the media. This was not the conversation. This was not the things people were talking about. What the conversation was here in London and here in the UK was around Priti Patel's new legislation about how we can immediately arrest protesters, because she originally believed that the Black Lives Matter protests were violent. So how can we get these quote unquote ethnic hooligans off the street? And that in itself, especially here in the UK, is the problem. The narrative is continually changed. And these systems are working perfectly because Black people and people of color, BAME as it is called here, again, another conversation for another day.
I have so many notes,
They are second class. They are the first to be demonized. They are the first to be denied Britishness in this case, because they are working against the state when they want fairness and equality for themselves.
Yeah, no, completely. It is just literally a question of narrative and like lens, like even the fact that like, so this, I mean, about 2 weeks, 10-ish days ago, it was announced that there was the British government was going to set up a commission on racial inequalities. Right. And it was being set up by like basically like Boris Johnson's like advisor on that kind of stuff.
Right.
And there's already an issue there because she has basically kind of like downplayed the fact that institutional racism exists, and she believes that there's like a culture of grievance, as they say, and she basically is her motto is like toughen up. Like you just got to do it. And she's already, but so I got this source from an article that came out like 10 days ago. And at that point, she had already basically like assigned for one person to be a part of this commission, who is like Trevor Phillips. And he used to be the chair of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. And he's also got some controversy associated to him because he thinks that UK Muslims are a nation within a nation, which like,
what does that mean?
Mm-hmm. That's what I want to know as well, honestly, because I don't understand. Yeah, diasporas are nations within nations. I'm not very understanding of what that means, because when you go to Africa, right? Like my mom lives in Senegal.
Right.
When you go there, when you go to Dakar, everyone's happy to say that they're an expat, that they're a part of the expat community, etc. So what's the difference between you being an expat and hanging out with your countrymen and women, right, in this other nation, right? And then having a part of your population here that is a certain religion that you associate with one specific type of person that you are trying to get out of this country. I'm not trying to get a suit in it. So I'm just going to like keep it at like nice and soft language. But my point is very clear in that this is a situation that people are using to specifically like reinforce their ideas of like, this is not what Britain should look like. Last weekend, there was a stabbing that happened outside of London, multiple stabbings, in fact, in Reading. And obviously like our thoughts are with the families of the victims and everything, because that's just not okay in any way, shape or form. And the person who carried out the stabbings is a Libyan refugee who's 25. And he had been on like MI5's watch list in the past. They deemed that he wasn't that big of a threat because basically like their thought process was that like he had access to like terrorist cells, and because he's Libyan, I guess that makes you automatically suspect. I
didn't know that.
Yeah, no, he was like on their watch list, but then they deemed him to be like not that big of a threat, so like they put him back down on the thing, right? Okay. And this man also had been diagnosed with like a number of mental health illnesses and issues. And as a third point in all of this, all three people that died as a result of the stabbings were part of the LGBTQ plus community. Okay. There are so many things to unpack in that, but the one thing that keeps sticking out for me and that I see consistently everywhere is Libyan refugee. I've seen one place where they mentioned the LGBTQ plus aspect of it. I'm happy to be proved wrong completely, like, because I think that that is also an aspect that like needs to be taken into it, because we both know that queer Black folks also suffer a lot in society from being like a margin within a margin.
Yep.
So that's something to take into account. He was on a watch list, so how was he not still? Do you know what I mean? If he was considered a threat at one point, I'm not saying we need to take him, I'm not saying bring him to a black site, but I'm saying that like we have these intelligence agencies for a reason. So like how did this like slip the cracks, and yet you still have families and people that are being harassed for having been that one time to that one country that like is considered to be harboring a lot of threat. Basically for me, it was just like, it looked like a huge just mishap in like how everything was handled. Like, if you're on a watch list, like that's already a huge sign of something. Like, even if it's not, it doesn't have to be related back to like a group, but as an individual, you're like, okay, this person might be a risk for others and for themselves. Like at this point, if mental health illnesses are included in it, I don't know. There's many aspects to this, which I was like, okay, like, these things need to be discussed. But in the headlines, you just see like Reading stabbings, like Libyan refugee, like all of that stuff. And it's just, I'm worried that basically it's going to be used as like even more of a reason to put in place like harder immigration laws and barriers, as it were.
No, I hear what you're saying. In one of my dissertations, I used like a theory by Schenker that was talking about the body can be marked for political use. It can be deemed things like an immigrant. It can be deemed things like a full citizen. It can be deemed as a criminal. all of which fall under however the state wants to see you, however the state wants to use you within its systems to push its narratives. And so there was obviously a conscious choice, as you spoke about, by the media, by the state, to produce a narrative which only highlights one aspect of a multifaceted problem. I don't want to break down the facets of watch lists and terrorism and all that, because we know it's inherently skewed to affect brown bodies and under the assumption that different populations have disproportionate propensities towards violence, which we know that's just not the case.
Yeah.
And there's a conscious choice to highlight those things, I think, especially here in the UK at the moment, because you are seeing a genuine solidarity between a myriad of groups as they are realizing now that they are systemically disenfranchised. And so it is a lot easier to start to separate those groups rather than unify them if you want to quell this movement that is happening and create it as a moment rather than a movement.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when we start to think about the complexities of issues like the Reading Statement, because you're right, it would be a lot for us to unpack to start to talk about the LGBTQ plus community and how this has disproportionately affected them in this case, and to unpack everything else that comes with it. But if we've just kept it on the surface level, we are seeing a continued narrative, which is exactly what we first started talking about when we referenced the difference in media coverage in this country in particular between an anti-Black Lives Matter protest and a Black Lives Matter protest.
Yeah.
Those are choices. And those are the types of things that we have to start to dissect. Those are the types of things that we have to start to look at and say, this is how the system is working correctly to inherently disenfranchise us.
Yeah.
Because you need narratives for things to continue. We have to start breaking down those narratives to get the level of equality that we are searching for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is just kind of, it is a question of narratives. And even like the narrative around now, like the point of, I need to stop saying like so much. Sorry, I just clocked. But even in the narrative now of, defund the police, like what does that mean? Like you don't want no more police force? No, no one said that. Like listen to the words that are being spoken. Defund the police does not mean get rid of it. Defund the police means let's get rid of the systems that make it that it's an institution that is heavily funded with like not that much regulation and accountability. If we're at a point where you have officers that done had 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 violations, 11 write-ups, 2 trips of administrative leave, why are they still there? Why is taxpayer money still paying for their salary? Like, they should not, you mess up at McDonald's, you get fired. So why is it that you got police officers that continuously mess up? I'm not even saying purposefully, but sometimes it looks like it's on purpose, and yet you keep them on the force. Like, one thing about, and I'm happy for, I don't know, not even you to tell me otherwise, but just kind of like to explore this further later on. But the whole fact that like in for-profit prisons in the US, like you need a quota and you need like you need a number of bodies to get, like whether it's government funding or whatever. Like, is it kind of like the same in the US? Like, is it a situation where you need a county needs X amount of officers per is there a similar, do you get what I'm saying? Do you get what I'm asking?
No, I understand what you're saying. And honestly, discussing privatized prisons, and we would literally have to spend an entire episode, you and I, dissecting privatized prisons and the impact, because that touches on what I touched on last week, which is the cycle that we're currently in, which is mass incarceration and the profiteering of companies on the backs of slave labor, on the fact that you have bodies in beds. And that doesn't just happen at the judiciary level. That's not just happening at sentencing. That's not just happening once you have somebody in the courtroom. That is a system that is operating in a way that is allowing for these things to occur. So yes, for that, I would say you and I know how much we love to give facts and figures and dissect things for people. And I do want to do that. And I feel like we will spend an episode and we will spend time, because I could talk about the preschool to prison pipeline and things like that for hours. And I think the basis and the start place of that is police systems, right? You brought that up, like one of the integral pieces of things like that being allowed to occur is these systems of policing. And I think right now, the narrative is getting muddled by people who do not necessarily understand what defunding the police means. I don't know if you guys can hear the police sirens in the background, but woo, they came right on cue.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing.
Wow.
But I think it's a simplistic narrative to assume that defunding the police simply just means the abolition of a police force with no background thought to it, or the only things that you have on the counterpoint is what's going to happen to violent crime. What happens if I'm potentially getting raped and there's no police? Okay, first of all, let's be very frank here. Violent crime in particular is a very small amount of the things that police actually do.
Yeah.
Which, whole nother topic, we will continue on with this conversation. But we'll use an example in New York City. At one point, I can't remember the exact year, but I was reading a Guardian article on it. The New York City Police Department decided to implement a slowdown. Basically, they were going to work slower to prove that they were essential. Well, during this time period, violent crime actually decreased from 3 to 6%.
Ooh, okay.
Awkward. I'm gonna let that marinate for a second in case somebody needs to rewind the tape. Listen to that again. And so the abolition and the defunding of the police is not a revolutionary concept. This is something that people like Angela Davis have, and what amazing mother of the movement. So happy to see her in Oakland. We give her props. I'm not gonna digress into her. But women and people of this movement who have been in this movement for a long time have been discussing this for generations.
Yeah.
And she was on Democracy Now! I believe it was somewhere in this 2-week span in which we have not been recording. Mm-hmm. And she talked about defunding the police and the abolition of police system. And effectively, she said that it was not about just getting rid of something and not knowing what to do after. It was dismantling the idea that violence is needed to create safety. Mm-hmm. Safety should not be safeguarded by violence. Mm-hmm. So defunding the police is about doing things like not having police on calls for people who are mentally ill. Mm-hmm. They are not trained to deal with the health ramifications. And that is where you see instances in which people are dying because they do not know how to handle these situations. I can speak from personal experience in the fact that, unfortunately, my mom had a friend who was affected by this. They were a person that needed to go to a hospital, but the police were called, and we all know the end of the story. Mm-hmm. That is not an isolated incident. Mm-hmm. Defunding the police is making sure that things like education are properly funded instead of having militarized weapons on the streets with billion-dollar budgets policing people. You don't need cops in schools.
No.
It's a simple fact. What are they doing?
Mm.
And so understanding that defunding the police is not simply saying, let's just get rid of this thing. We want a free for all, whatever happens, happens. No, it's about rethinking the way that systems should work, shifting them so that they work in a more equitable way, so that people are actually all given opportunity instead of being surveilled by the state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's where, and I think that is where, that is the hard crux. People are so used to state-sponsored surveillance, and I think a lot of people don't even recognize that they're used to state-sponsored surveillance. But like, we can go back to Foucault in the 1700s, like talking about the ways in which the state surveils bodies, the ways in which they imprison people and utilize them to create political motives, the ways in which narratives, like we talked about, are created, and the disproportionate effects in which those have on Black people. And he wasn't even talking about America. And I'm sure you can and will touch on how this affects people in France and even here in the UK. Defunding the police is changing that narrative. It is shifting that ideology that surveillance and violence are the appropriate way to handle a myriad of community issues, because it's not. And once it's defunded, nobody's saying that you are useless, right? But we do need to rethink that entire system, because policing should not look the way that it does now.
Yeah. No, completely. This whole, basically, I think whenever there's situations where people want to contest the idea to defunding the police and stuff, because of the points that you brought up, where they say like, well, then what, no more law enforcement? No, it's a situation where, and someone who's, fortunately yet unfortunately, because he passed away, and so obviously, like, rest in peace to Elijah McClain, but Elijah McClain's death is very, very, what's the word? Like, it reinforces the fact that we need to reconsider where these funds go and how they're used. For those who don't know, Elijah McClain was a 23-year-old boy from, I say boy because I am 24 and I call myself a girl. So like, I am a child still. Like, despite being an adult, I am a child still. So for me, like, that's a child. And he's from Chicago, right? Like, not
suburbs. Yeah, he's from Aurora, so Chicagoland area.
Right, Chicagoland area. Someone called 911 one night because they reported that there was a sketchy looking man that was wearing a ski mask and that was like waving his arms around, Elijah was anemic, so he wore like layers to keep himself just like, warm and safe. And I don't know, you ever just have some joy and like listen to music and just be happy, like going down the street? I'm not sure how that is a crime of any sort. And I did read that the woman who placed the 911 phone call later did say that she was not like under any immediate threat. So like, she just wanted to like call to report that there was a sketchy looking man outside, but she herself was not in any like immediate imminent danger.
Well, that's when you believe that the police force works at your own behest, you believe that your first call should always be to them, and that is a privilege afforded to white people that is not afforded to people of color across the globe.
It is not.
I digress. Please continue.
Yeah. No, it's no, yeah. So basically, officers then like approach him and they start to question him, and then a struggle happens, and he's resisting arrest because every Black male that is basically like talking to cops is resisting arrest in some way or another. And apparently there's like there's an officer that's saying that he went and reached for his gun, which I don't know. I didn't know Elijah personally, so I can't speak on his intelligence, but my guess is that like, if you're ever facing a police officer, whether or not you're innocent or guilty, you probably wouldn't reach for a gun, their gun more specifically, that's holstered in and stuff, because they're supposed to keep it in the holster until there's like imminent threat. But that's, again,
that's a
conversations for later, right? So all of this to say that obviously, up until that point, when I heard the story, I was like, yeah, okay, excessive use of force, like literally no reason for stopping him other than him being Black and wearing a ski mask, like essentially. So, you can't immediately recognize if it's a threat or not. They then called the fire paramedics, and they injected him with 500 milligrams of ketamine to sedate him. Ketamine is a tranquilizer. Ketamine is a controlled substance. Ketamine is not supposed to be administered by anyone that doesn't have a medical license, because it is a what? Controlled substance. So you can't just buy it willy-nilly at the pharmacy. And they decide to, and again, it being a controlled substance means that there are a number of things that need to be taken into consideration before it's administered to someone. This person's history, health history, God, but I'm French. But, you know, like this person's like medical history. Oh, that's the word, medical history. You know, their state of mind in that moment, like their body height, their weight, like all of these things that go into account of how much this person should be administered, you know, so that it doesn't shock their system. You want to tell me the fire paramedics had the time to establish a medical history and all of that before they injected him? No, they saw cops struggling over a black body and thought, oh my God, we need to sedate him ASAP or else it's going to be a whole other situation. And mind you, maybe the idea was to sedate him so that he doesn't struggle, so that he doesn't end up with a broken back because of a knee being jammed on his spine. Mm-hmm. It could have been that situation. I'm saying it could have because I don't know, so I can't speak on it. But right. Regardless, what ended up happening is that Elijah went into panic. And because he had still all this pressure on him and now he's tranquilized, feeling numb, he threw up and he ended up dying. Yeah. And so and that's at that moment that I was like, oh my God, you have people who are not trained, who are out here handling drugs. And what, you just let it slide because he was resisting arrest and God, it's an unfortunate incident. If that doesn't go to prove to you that like, we need to rethink the way in which we fund these law enforcement bodies, I don't know what more example you could want. Yeah. Like that for me is just the what's the saying? The proof in the pudding. Like it's there. It's right there. It's in front of you. And you're still looking at people going, no, we should have all of these AK whatevers in the street with our cops. Like, it's completely fine. It's not fine.
And that's the whole point. And it's this idea that defunding or abolition, it's not about like recognizing that there are need for different sets of institutions to help people. That is not the idea. And I think that is where people get lost. But things that are defined as crime oftentimes are symptoms of systematic problems in our society that are not adequately being addressed. And so our decisions are then to throw police at the problem. That in itself is the inherent issue. Yeah. That is the problem. Mm-hmm. It is that we are trying to use a catch-all solution to a multitude of systemic problems in our society, and they are disproportionately, actually almost all, affecting Black and brown bodies. That is the problem. That is why people are saying this can no longer occur. Like I touched on last week, especially in the US, the police system in itself is inherently flawed because it is based on a racist apparatus that was developed in slavery. We continued with this racist apparatus through every cyclical cast. Even as Black people continue to evolve, continue to find their joy, continue to be the myriad of different things that we are today, the system kept adapting to keep them in their place. When you think about problems and when you think about cases such as Elijah McClain, the reason that it's so disheartening is because you literally saw a person simply existing. You were killed for existing. Your existence was a threat to another human for no reason. And he is not a singular case. There's the case of the young Black boy who decided, he missed his bus for school and took a shortcut. And we all know the end of the story, right? People saw him as a threat, and now we have another RIP. That is a problem. It is the idea that we are fixing systemic and societal problems with militarized weapons and a system that is saying it is okay to operate like we are existing in a war zone. That is why people are calling for defunding. It is gobsmacking to me that the LAPD can defund by $150 million, and that is literally a drop in the bucket in their budget. It is a drop in the bucket. That is the whole point. Like that was literally like we had money to spare.
Yeah.
It sounds good, right? It sounds big. Really, in a multi-billion-dollar budget, you just had money to spare.
Yeah.
And so we really need to get people who are not understanding this issue to start thinking more from a place of like, a lot of these people are like, we need the police and neighborhoods help. Like, how could you hate the police? I need you to step out of your own zone.
Yeah.
I need you to step out of your own complicit space. I need you to step out of the ideology in which the police are always coming to help and are helpful for you. And recognize that right now, police and the systems of policing, because I said it last episode, I am the first to admit, there are good people who are police. Neither of us are saying that there are not good people who are police. What we are saying is the system of policing is inherently flawed. It is inherently based on a racist system, which means when you are operating within that system, you are not operating in a place of good.
Yeah.
You cannot be, even if you are doing the best that you can. And that is not a reflection on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the system in itself needs to be disbanded and needs to be rethought. It needs to be reimagined. It needs to be reinvented. When we think about this moment, we need to start asking ourselves, how do we create more equity for people? It actually takes me back to the launch yesterday and something that Bonnie said that really stuck in my head. She said that sometimes to bring a new seat at the table, somebody needs to step away from the table. There are a lot of people who are engaging in allyship and engaging in this conversation who thinks we need to just make more room at the table. Right now isn't necessarily the moment where we need to make more room. It is the moment where you need to allow people who have been in this fight, people who are affected by this fight, people who are saying that they are dying in this fight. Their voices need to be the voices that are listening to. And if they are saying, we are dying because of a racist system, we are dying because we are disproportionately do not have access to things that other people are given as a birthright. We are not offered that same level of citizenship, those unalienable rights that are spoken about in the US Constitution. We are not given that. Our voices and our problems need to be the ones that we are talking about. Our solutions are the ones that we need to be pushing. If we are telling you these are the things we need, it is not your job to say, well, no, maybe this will work better. No, that's not how this works.
No, yeah. I couldn't agree. And the system is inherently flawed because of the reasons why it was created. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think we touched on this last week, sorry, no, 2 weeks ago. But, you know, it's in the US, like the police force that we see today was created from the need to having like slave catchers for, what was it, runaway slaves? Like
keeping slaves in line, runaway slaves, because you think that Black people are inherently violent and subhuman, you know, take your pick.
That whole, yeah. Like, you know, it came from that. In the UK, it was like, mostly based off of like the skeleton for at least like the London police is the force that was set up when London became like heavily industrialized, and then you had like masses of people coming in from the countryside looking for work, and obviously they were working in like horrifying conditions where you had like kids working in like, you know, like factory mills and all that stuff. Factory mills, you get what I'm saying? Factories.
I know where you're going.
Yeah, and so like this force was created to kind of like keep them in line as well. So there's this whole idea of, I mean, I think it's what we're coming to realize here is that like these modern systems that we've always relied on for when we need, you know, some help, or like when we basically need like emergency services, it's been based off of the idea that like we need to keep people in line, not that we need to keep people safe. it's two very different things. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that delineation is something that people don't talk about, right?
Yeah.
It is not the idea that people should feel safe or feel comfortable. It is the idea that people need to stay operating within the way that the state structure and mainframe wants them to operate.
Like I looked up, being French, I looked up like what the history of like the French police is. And again, it's like, I mean, first of all, funnily enough, like the ancestor of like the French police force currently dates back to like the Middle Ages and like to like 1300 something. And it was just like extra bodies to send like on the battlefield if you needed, kind of thing.
Yikes.
But it was never, I don't know. I was like, huh, interesting. It's been a while. Like, and then it, after the like revolution where you had no more monarchy and stuff, basically like the guards that were supposed to protect the monarchy at the time, they switched sides, and then they were like, actually, we're with the idea of creating a republic. And so they like, funnily enough, like apparently it was like people associated them obviously with like royalty and the monarchy and stuff, but in reality, they actually were up for, a parliamentary republic that like would.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And so I was thinking like, in what context does that, I don't know. I was just kind of thinking like, so how did that evolution, like what happened from there? And I think in the case of France, it's very much one where it's like, again, like the state apparatus is what you, like the state is what you value and like is what you like adhere to. Like it's less like when you're in public in France, like you're supposed to just be like a citizen. Like your religion doesn't matter, your origins don't matter, like you're a French citizen kind of thing. I know it's trying to basically say like we see no color and stuff, and I get it, but I also am now at a point where I'm like, well, no, because I walk around French society and I'm seen as like mixed, so that's not that, it doesn't work that way. But essentially, like it's gotten to a point where now you have basically two branches of police, one of which is meant to be like civilian and oversees like basically I think like the entire country, and then one of which is the military one, but that's the one that's in smaller towns and like rural suburban areas and stuff. And so I'm just kind of like, so you put in the military branches like in the suburbs, in the countryside, like far away from the city and stuff. But then in the larger cities, you put like the civilian like police force that is not a branch of the military, and that's just like an agency. And then within that, you have two separate riot police forces as well. So it's like this like subsections of subsections of subsections, and all of that's got to be funded, right? All of that has to be funded.
You are blowing my mind right now, so please continue.
Stop. But like, why do you need to have two separate forces of order in France? Why do you need to have two separate like riot polices as well, who get confused for one another and whose jurisdictions, like whose like, constitutions or whatever, aren't even necessarily that different. It's just that one of them can operate outside of France because it would be part of like that military branch. And do you know what is the craziest thing? The guy who set up the French like police system that we see now, Eugène François Vidocq, like nice, classic, very French name. He was a criminal who basically like was able to worm his way into creating this force, which Napoleon was like, yes, fantastic idea. Like, this is the way that we, make sure that people stay in line. And obviously him being a criminal, he's got all of the inside takes of it.
Right.
He then is the one who gets to recruit everyone on this force. So literally the first proper like national police force in France were thugs. They were thugs. Some of them
not by the Trump context, they were actually thugs.
Actual thugs. And some of them didn't even get like paid the way that you would. They accepted like bribes. They were very happy to be paid in like gambling stuff, like basically bribes. My mind yesterday exploded. Like, I don't think you understand. I was like, oh my God. And when you think about like French police now is like no different really than like what we see in the UK in terms of like profiling and in terms of like internal racism. Like I saw this interview of this like policewoman who remained anonymous, but she said that she has like Arab, like North African origins.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a very, I don't want to say it here because I don't want to like trigger anyone, but there's a word in France that's, it's a slur, it's disgusting. And it's used to designate like people of like Arab, like North African origins.
Right.
And when she joined the force, she was referred to as that.
In the UK or in France?
In France.
Wow.
She was referred to as like the, like, yeah. And the way in which they go about like policing is the same. It's what we see here. It's just that people don't, because there's this narrative that we are all citizens under the same state, and that like once you're in this, like once you have your like public life and you're out there, like you're just coexisting as citizens, but not addressing the fact that you still get racial slurs thrown at you in the street for being a certain color or even religion. Like it doesn't even really necessarily matter whether or not you look like you're from Africa or you're from wherever, as long as like there's a way to like point you out. And it's messed up. It's no different. And it honestly like pains me every time that I think that people that I know, like even my own family, not that they've ever said that it doesn't exist. Do you know what I mean? Like my family has never, I'm trying to make it sound like they're like, no, it doesn't exist. But there is no like real recognition of what's happening because it's always seen as just kind of like freak accidents. There's a story of a young boy who was, his name is Theo, and he like was literally raped by a police officer with the baton. And to this day, he's still recovering physically. And this happened like 4 years ago. And to this day, the like public explanation for this has been that like it was an incident, and the baton that, you could like press a button and it expands, accidentally found its way into Theo's backside. They were doing a search on him, and next thing you know, he's like feeling some type of thing going up, and he's just kind of like, and he like was like properly like internally bruised. Like the man is still recovering physically, let alone mentally what he must be going through. But physically, he is still recovering. And I just remember seeing this like photo op of, I don't remember what minister it was at the time, but whatever, but at the hospital with him, like holding his hand and everything. And I'm like, bro, go find the cop that did this and press charges. Like, why are you out here shaking hands in a hospital getting your photo op if the system that let this happen is still in place and potentially still happening across the country anyway? Like, I think my point through all of this is just that like the UK is not innocent. France is not innocent. I think the West, capital W in general, is not innocent, because this is the part of the world that has exerted the most influence and power for the last 500-600 years. All of this wealth has been concentrated in this part of the world. And this is why we see that now we've got like uprisings and protests, because people are finally at the point where they're like, enough is enough, dude. Like, I cannot keep living like this. I am from this country. Like, this is my identity. Like, why is this being questioned? Why am I being controlled and policed for this simple reason that I look the way that I do?
And yeah, first of all, I'm still reeling from literally everything you just said. So there's that. And I think the French example is really interesting because, I think it takes me back to the World Cup, and I was actually in Paris during the championship. And yeah, Afro-punk vibes. And people were so ecstatic about the French team winning, rightfully so.
Yeah.
But let's be real. France's team is a compilation of a who's who from insert African country here. That's a conversation that people aren't ready to have. But and you could see the people on the street, right? And I've had friends who have friends who talked about, you know, being Black in Paris, and that's in itself a totally different in the way you're treated and understanding. But in the narrative, we are all just insert this thing. It is this colorblind ideology. And I think here in the UK, there's a very similar sense of relative colorblind ideology. It is, we are all British, right? It's how they can justify that, what is it, tikka masala is a national dish? What British person made tikka masala? I really would like to meet them. I want to know, how did this become yours? And so it is this narrative, right, that these incidents that are occurring and the negative impacts of things like stop and search here in the UK, which we all know disproportionately affect Black and brown bodies, it's just happening because those people look suspicious. Well, what made them look suspicious to you? That is my question. What made them look suspicious? Because you surely cannot say things like, we're stopping every person with a backpack, because you'd literally be stopping every Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Yeah.
So that's not true. And it is, and I think you hit the nail on the head, it is a problem of the capital W West. And when you hearken back to different layers of policing, you know, you have the same, you said it, you have the same system here, right? You have multitudes of sets of police.
Yeah.
Some in which, for my US listeners, I don't even realize, police in the UK carry guns. They're just a very specific subset of the police in the UK, right? It is this notion that all police in the UK have no guns. No. A very specific subset of police do carry guns, and they do exist, and they are brought in for, you know, certain periods, and we all know why in certain periods they feel like they need to be around. And that in itself is a conversation about who is policed and how they are policed, and the effects that we've talked about on Black and brown bodies. And I think we can go back to the original conversation that we were having. It's actually talking about the UK just sparked this, but I was in a park yesterday, still social distancing. We are still in a pandemic, wearing a mask. This is not a joke.
Good girl.
And yesterday evening, and I realized how exposed and how deeply entrenched my fear of police and police presences. I literally saw a police car drive by and my heart started to race. Yeah. I was doing nothing wrong except sitting in a space, right? Enjoying company. I was doing nothing. But the car being around gave me fear, right? You toppled that with like, I came back around, because obviously you're sitting in a park, they do loops or whatever. They're patrolling the park.
Yeah.
And they were patrolling with their lights on. I saw the lights and I inherently, like, heightened sense of anxiety, stress levels, you know, being with a group of Black men who I also knew were doing nothing wrong. Fear levels, what could happen, what if such and everything, every list, everything, you know. Being from Chicago, I am not immune. I've been in situations with my younger brother where I've seen police, you know, pull guns on him. I've seen them yell at him. I know stories of them pulling him out of cars and like throwing them. Like, these are not isolated incidents. These are inherent fears that you have because that level of surveying and that level of violence that is perpetrated by police is real, it's felt, it's lived experience, and it's generational PTSD and generational trauma. And it's top down. You and I didn't even really touch on yet the impact of the militarization of police forces and the coexistence of the way that the military affects police forces. I can think about in Chicago in particular, there used to be a site called Area 2 in the 1970s that was run by a very corrupt cop called John Burge. And it was literally the first Black site in Chicago. They used Vietnam level torture tactics on Black bodies. And so things like that You know, that kind of stuff. They talked about people were tortured into confessions, even leading into stuff like death penalty convictions. It's taken generations and civil suits and a myriad of things to even bring this to light, let alone get people retribution or deal with the mental trauma of what occurred there. And I say that, and I'm sure people will sit here and they'll listen and they'll say, well, that was the 1970s. Okay, if you need a more recent example, there was Homan Square, which is on the southwest side of Chicago, which is known to have used torture tactics used similar to Abu Ghraib. It was well known by lawyers. I wrote about this in my master's dissertation. It was well known by lawyers if you could not find your client and they were Black and brown from this particular community, they were likely in Homan Square.
That's beyond messed up, because that's domestically as well. Like, the whole...
Somebody actually said it is a domestic Black site. It is something that the CIA, it is like a domestic Black site.
That's madness. That's madness. Like, how do you justify that later on? And even, like, again, those who set it up aren't even going to be the ones who have to justify it. So, like, how you can't justify that? Like, there is literally no, that is so messed up. That is so messed up.
There's no justification. And I'm not going to rag on Chicago because I love my hometown, but I really do. But it does have its own inherent problems. And I would be remiss if I didn't discuss the systems that were in place that were allowing people to call it things like Chirac when not discussing the systemic issues that occur in the education system and the access to jobs and the illegal guns being run through Indiana and the preschool to prison pipeline and the myriad of things that allow you to think that Black on Black crime is a thing when it's not, especially there are systems problems, right? And the fact that things like Black sites can operate in a space that is supposed to be that culturally diverse, that is supposed to be that progressive, that liberal, that forward thinking, that tells you there is a systems problem. And they're not alone, right? You had judges in, Arizona, I believe his last was Arpaio, who was basically humiliating prisoners during prison labor, having them wearing pink panties, all of these things, dehumanizing people. It is a systems problem. I guarantee you, if I go to any of the prisons that are operating within prison labor and a myriad of other things, you will find the same level of tactics and militarization.
Yeah.
And intermingling of people to a certain extent, right? People come out, in a lot of cases, you have people come out of the military and go into the police force. It's a natural progression, quote unquote. Why is that a natural progression? Why is what you learned in war a natural progression to domestic policing?
No.
That is a problem. That ideology is a problem.
Mm. Mm. It is, yeah. It's a state of mind. Like, obviously not just a state of mind, but it's like a state of mind in that, like, it's so entrenched in just like how we think that things work, that's how it is. Like, that's how it has to be.
It's an ego trip.
Yeah.
Genuinely. And so much of, I believe my mother said this to me the other day, and so many, shout out to you, Mom, you're great. In so many instances, policing is built on ego, right? When you hearken back to videos like Rayshard Brooks, why did the officer shoot first? Because he felt like his ego was threatened, right? How could this drunk Black man who I'm superior to, how could he get my taser? How could he run away from me? How could he humiliate me? Oh, I'm gonna show you I'm the big man. Boom, we're done.
Mm-hmm.
Ego. Why do you feel like you can stop and search 12-year-olds here in the UK because they look suspicious to you? Ego. It is an ideology that is perpetuated by this system because it's inherently based on the ideal that you are better than somebody else, so you should be policing them.
It's horrifying. Like, I don't know. I hate it. And I think it's one of those where it's like, thankfully, I've never grown up with like fear of the police, but in recent years, like, I have grown to fear them as well. And it's like, it's as if we reach our own awakening point as well. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
looking around you and just kind of going like, wow, this is what's happening around us. And I mean, is it all doom and gloom? Like, is there not going to be any change? Like, I want to believe that this is the start of the way that Neda Shaheen put it so brilliantly in her article. It's the Western Spring. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is
Mm-hmm.
our moment of revolution, and like, this is what is, because I firmly believe that like what we do here has obviously ripple effects like across the world, because like this part of the world is the one that historically has had like the most power and has been, well, recently anyway. Yeah, but it's another conversation, right? And so I want to believe that like this is going to be the start of change, but you know, it's like, yeah, 2 weeks ago we were like, we're making steps, we're doing progress, blah blah blah, and then you have like 5 deaths that happen in the space of those 2 weeks. It's like we're making 1 step forward, but then like 7 steps back. But yeah, at least we're making a step forward. Do you know what I mean? Or is it even forward, or is it like sideways?
I think what you and I have shown, which I'm just realizing now, we didn't even touch on the myriad of public lynchings that occurred in the US. You said in 2 weeks, 1 step forward, 1 step back. People were literally hung.
Yeah.
People hung from trees in the past 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I don't even think I have the mental capacity to go back into that, as we've already touched on what lynching symbolizes in the public affect of what that shows.
And for them to be suicides, really? Like,
how?
It's not even disrespect at this point. It's just like plain, it's blatant, overt, like, I don't care about you.
Yeah.
Like, it goes beyond disrespect.
Exactly. And I think what we realize in this conversation, right, that you and I are having, that we've continued, and the reason that we are going to continue to have this conversation and place this conversation on Black Lives Matter and the importance of POC lives in the global context, is that it is a global system, right?
Yeah.
And in this is a movement, it is not a moment. But to recognize that this is a movement, recognize that this is going to be a long and arduous process. These systems, especially I think here in Europe, specifically in the UK, are incredibly entrenched. And here, specifically to the point that some people don't even see them. Mm. And I think when you and I start to have the conversation about things like defunding the police, we started there explaining why defunding the police is important in an American context. We elaborated on the ideals that it is inherent and important for the pure fact that other things need money. And there are communities which are suffering because we are giving all the money to the police. So we need to rethink those systems. But in us starting that conversation about why policing needs to be changed as a system and why it needs to be abolished and then rethought of, we recognize that across the globe, systems of policing are deeply entrenched in society and they are inherently flawed. For us to move forward, we have to sit here and continue to peel back the layers of this onion, to say, I'm quoting Shrek, I think. We have to sit here and pull back the layers of these problems. These are not simplistic problems. If they were simple problems, we wouldn't have to be screaming about it. We wouldn't have to be trying to prove to you that they matter. We wouldn't have to be trying to unpack them in a understandable and polite way. We wouldn't need to sit here and talk to you.
Yeah.
But we have to break it down because there are historical contexts in which all of these systems are built. And it's like we said last week, policing is literally the first rung of the systems in which we are dismantling to get equality globally for Black people. It is the first stop in this journey. And if in this first stop, we have all of these layers, we are telling you that this is going to be a long unpacking, a rude awakening about the history of all of these countries. And it's gonna be uncomfortable and you're gonna need to get used to it. And
yep.
we as people, right? You and I said it last week, and I'll say it again. You and I are having a conversation. You and I are talking about things in which we've studied, in which we've read about, our lived experiences, and they're different, but also the same. And we're not sitting here on a soapbox telling you this is the way to think, this is the way to be. We're simply saying that, like, if we can tell you from our own academic research, from people that we consider esteemed, from our own lived life experience and familial reckonings generationally, that this is the conversation that needs to be had, this is why things need to change, then that's what needs to happen. Yeah. That's why the platform exists. That's why we are allowed to say things like taking 7 steps forward to go back, because we know what back looks like. We know our history. We know where we came from, and we know where we're attempting to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, completely. I think that's a really beautiful note to, like, a tragically beautiful note to, like, potentially let our viewers and our listeners go back to their regularly scheduled lives for, because we've been talking for a long time, ma'am.
Our bad. We really our conversation.
These conversations need to happen, though, I think, and that's just kind of like that's how we need to go about them. Like, we don't have much of a choice, and it's at the point where, like, yeah, it needs to be uncomfortable for change to happen. Like, when you got a wedgie, you don't just leave it there because you're not bothered. It's uncomfortable. You change it. Like, you change positions. I don't know how else to, like, come across.
Simple. What you said.
It's our societal wedgie at the moment, and it needs to go. But before we, like, say anything else, I just want to give a special shout out to my mom, because it's her birthday today.
Woo, happy birthday.
And she's fantastic and wonderful and beautiful. And she's like my ultimate source of just what it means to be, like, a stellar, awesome, inspiring, like, legendary Black woman, Black Congolese woman. And I just, this is definitely the place to shout her out. So happy birthday, Mom, joyeux anniversaire, love you so much. Woohoo!
We love
Thanks for everything you do.
We love that energy, and I think that's the perfect note to leave it. Happy birthday to your mom. Another incredibly huge thank you to all the powerful women of color who spoke on our behalf yesterday at the virtual launch in which we hosted. We are eternally grateful. You provided a new source of knowledge for us. You enlightened a myriad of people. If you missed it, check out our Twitter, because it was live streamed and fed to you. I'm sure we tried to get it popping. I'm sure we will be putting out the videos and clips and a myriad of things. And if you want to continue in this conversation with us, we will be having it for a long time on this podcast and on this show. But if you're missing us in between these 2-week breaks, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram, check us out on LinkedIn. We are continually providing content for here in the UK. Our mother organization is providing content for the US in general. We have the West Coast coming out for the West Coast. We have New York happening. There's so many things at WCAPS in which you should be paying attention to. We are women of color, genuinely talking about the things we care about, trying to change this globe. This is a movement, not a moment, and we are so happy to be talking to you. I am Mari.
And I am Melina.
Thank you for coming to Got Melanin.